Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming to the next webinar in our series. Tonight's webinar is on Introduction to Rooftop Solar. My name is Ali Devlin. I'm the Sustainability Officer at Northern Beaches Council, part of the Community Sustainability team. And this is a series of webinars that we run for our community around energy and solar and sort of debunking demystifying all the information that's out there. We have our expert solar and expert energy and solar advisory service, Jimmy Lee, here with us today, and he's the one going to be giving us, telling us all about this subject. I am here just to give you a little bit of housekeeping. So I've just said that this webinar is being recorded today. There is a chat function for your questions. We are going to keep you all on mute and videos off so that we can actually publish this video hopefully in the next couple of days for you to be able to review again in your leisure. So if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat. That will be done at the end. And then this webinar will be sent out to you as well with some of the key questions that are asked in this webinar, if there are any, addressed in that email. All right, I hope that, right, Jimmy, can you click on to the next slides just to check? Yeah, so Q&A, and next slide, I think, is our poll.
Oh, yes.
We've already done all that. That's great. Okay, so hopefully you've all got your phones on you, and if not, we might be able to I'll just try and see if I can click on get the link for you. But if we can just get you to give us a big understanding, really, of where you're at and your knowledge of solar and batteries would be great. So we'll just give you a couple of minutes here to answer the poll. Let's see what we've. Can you see that poll, Jimmy?
I can. We have a lot of you who have not started your journey prior to this webinar, which is perfect because we can start right from the beginning and assume you know nothing.
Fabulous. Right, I'm just going to get, there's still a few responses we've got coming through. So I'll just see if I can, for those who are not working with their phones, let me just see if I can stick this poll in the chat for you. Bit lengthy old one there, but that gives everyone else a bit of an opportunity. Right, I think that's it. So we all own a house. Oh no, one's a townhouse. We have owner occupier, fantastic. And what else have we got here? So most haven't started your journey, which is great. So we've got lots of new people to help on their net zero journey, on their solar and battery journey. It's fantastic. Yeah, want a new solar system. 38% of you want a new solar system. 24% of you are looking to install in the next 12 months. And 74, no, what's this one? And you're not sure about, half of you are not sure about batteries yet. Well, hopefully you'll get better understanding of that by the end of the webinar. Right. In the essence of getting this done, we've got a lot of information. We will hand over to Jimmy, our solar and energy specialist from ZapCat.
Thank you, Ali. Hello, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about a couple of topics related to solar and battery. But most of these topics are designed to get you from knowing nothing or very little about solar to a point where you can maybe have a more confident conversation with an installer. So on the agenda for today is benefits of home solar. So everyone here is really interested already, so we don't need to talk too much about that, but it is just worth a reminder as to what it does for you. Number two, how does solar work? Kind of the technical basics. How do you select the right system size? Any particular special circumstances that you need to be aware of? How does it all work with batteries and VPPs? How do you get a solar quote? And summarizing it with 5 steps to rooftop solar. Let's get into it. Benefits of solar. It's actually pretty straightforward. Because you're generating your own energy rather than relying on the energy companies, you're saving your bills. That's kind of the obvious ones, but also you're protecting yourself from rising energy costs. If, for example, you're getting 80% of your energy from your own solar and battery system, then even if there's a massive rise in electricity prices, that only affects 20% of your bill. So that energy independence is a really important aspect that's worth keeping in mind. Number two is increasing your property price. So we'll talk about that in a bit as well. And number three is reducing your carbon footprint. So let's get into it. So number one, saving on bills. So if you have solar panels alone, why do you save money? Well, it's because you are needing to buy less electricity from the grid. That's where most of your savings come from. The average electricity tariff for a residential home in New South Wales is something like 30 to 40 cents per kilowatt hour. A kilowatt hour is just a measure of how much electricity you're using. And if you have an appropriately sized solar system, you're probably generating most of the energy you need during the daytime. And so if you're using 50% of your electricity during the daytime, that's 50% that you no longer need to import because your solar system is generating it for you. But if you're home mostly during the nighttime and most of your electricity consumption is in the evenings, then maybe you might cut your bills by, say, 25%. So these are just really rough ballpark estimates. But the important thing is to understand the mechanism of saving, which is you are reducing the amount you have to import. It's true that for excess energy you generate, you can sell it to the grid, but compared to how much it costs to buy electricity, it's not a lot. So it costs 30 to 40 cents a kilowatt hour to buy electricity, but when you sell excess energy from solar, you're only getting 4 cents a kilowatt hour back. So most of your savings are going to be from offsetting your imports, not from selling your excess. The reason why solar and a battery can cut your bills by 80 to 90% if you get something large enough, appropriately sized, if your house is suitable, yada yada, it's because your solar will be charging, your excess solar will be charging your battery during the day, and you'll be storing that in your battery, and then you will be using that at night when the sun isn't shining. So here's an example of how that looks like for a regular solar system. So this chart, the red is where you are buying or importing electricity from the grid. And then as you go along into the middle of the day, in the morning, in the middle of the day, when solar starts generating, then that's that curve you see. That's all the solar energy you're generating. And that what do we call that? Light green, gray, that line at the bottom, that is all the electricity you are no longer needing to import because you're generating solar instead. And finally, the sun sets, and then you're back to buying electricity from the grid. So that's, how much of your energy you're using during that light green, gray period of the day. That's how much you save on your bills, because that's the energy that you're not importing anymore, that you no longer need to pay for. What happens if you have a battery? If you have a battery, you can see that while your battery is not full yet, it is still charging from solar. So if we look at the graph together, we can see that yes, you're still generating solar, but rather than most of it being sold, which is dark green, a big proportion of that is being stored in your battery instead, and that is the orange. So just to summarize, early in the morning, you might be using some residual energy from your battery. You might be importing from the grid. When the sun starts shining at around 7 a.m., 8 a.m., you'll start you will no longer need to import electricity from the grid, but all your excess electricity goes into the battery until your battery is full. After your battery is full, then you start exporting your energy normally, as you would if you didn't have a battery. And the main benefit of a battery is, say, at 6 p.m., when the sun goes down, rather than importing from the grid, you'll just be using energy from your battery instead. And so compared to before, where all that red is what you used to pay the energy companies with solar, without solar. With solar, you only need to pay before and after the day period. And with a battery, you only need to pay when your battery has run out. So that's how you get most of your bill eliminated. So if you had a larger battery, then that area in orange would just be more because you can store more during the day. And so you'd be even more energy independent. That's the first benefit of solar, reducing bills and energy independence. The next benefit is increasing your property value. So here is a study from Domain, which basically says that houses in Sydney with energy efficient features sold for about 23% more than those without energy efficient features. What do we mean by energy efficient features? Well, there are a few different things. It is whether it is north facing, it's whether there's double glazing, and it's whether there is solar. So those three are kind of the top three reasons behind this. So solar is a significant contributor to this 23% value. As you can see here, solar is the second most value-adding feature after double glazing. North facing is obviously preferable, but you can't pay someone to make your house north facing unless you are very, very motivated. Finally, the third benefit is reducing your carbon footprint. So the important thing here is that the majority of our emissions really just come from energy use. And so if you reduce your energy use, you reduce your emissions and your carbon footprint. So in a way, how much you reduce your energy bills by is also directly proportional to how much you reduce your emissions by. So of the 22,500 solar installations in the Northern Beaches, that's 43,000 cars taken off the road every year. And that's not even including an EV. So getting solar is one of the single most impactful things you can do to reduce your emissions, mainly because you're drastically reducing your energy usage and you have lower bills on the side. Cool. So what about renters and landlords? There is I guess, a misalignment of incentives often when the landlord has to pay for solar and the renters are the one that benefit because they have lower bills. So how many renter landlords get around this is to just change the rent. So you might say, hey, I want to do my part for the planet, or I'm just really interested in solar. I want to install on my building. I want to increase my property value, but I want to get some benefit as well as a landlord. So maybe I will agree with my tenant that I'll install solar, which will reduce their bills, but in exchange, I'll increase their rent a little bit. And so there's still a very workable arrangement that can happen even if you're in a renter-landlord relationship. Strata is pretty similar in principle, except that in addition to the individual unit bills, which is what you pay yourself in each apartment, strata buildings also have common area bills, which is what all owners pay through strata levies. So this includes electricity used for lights, car park ventilation, lifts. You have a central electric hot water system, for example. Those are all kind of go into common area bills. And the focus of this webinar is not on strata, but right now there's a very good rebate on offer from the New South Wales government where you get 50% off a solar system for your apartment building if it's a particular type of solar system. So we won't cover that too much, but definitely look into that if you're in a strata building. But I think most of you guys are in houses and townhouses as per the poll. Similarly, for businesses, you're also reducing your business's electricity bills and you are protecting your business from future price rises. If you want to install EV charging later as a staff perk or just for yourself, etc., that will drastically reduce the cost of charging EVs because, EVs will just be charging in the middle of the day while your employees are at work. There are also tax incentives available for your business. Your accountant should know about these. And finally, of course, it'll significantly reduce your business's greenhouse gas emissions because you are using less energy, and energy is the thing that we're trying to reduce. Anyways, I'm sure most of you already are convinced that solar is something that is potentially worth looking into. So let's get into how does solar work? What are the basics? Let's start from the absolute basics. Number one, the sun shines on solar panels. Solar panels generate energy. What happens what happens to that energy is that in most types of systems, there's a cable that will take the energy down to ground level into a box called an inverter. All an inverter does is it's a thing that turns the energy that solar panels produce into a form that your house can use. So solar panels generate DC energy, and then the inverter turns it into your 240-volt AC energy that all your appliances use. And then all that energy that is being converted by the inverter that gets sent straight to your switchboard, which reduces the amount of energy you need to buy from the grid because it's coming from your roof instead. So that's kind of the basics. You have panels, you have an inverter is connected to your switchboard. As a bonus, if you have a battery, your battery can also be connected to the setup, and you'll store your surplus energy to use at night when your panels aren't producing energy, like we talked about earlier. So there are actually three types of inverters, three types of solar systems, but really kind of the type of solar system, they are useful for different situations and also changes the type of inverter that you use. So the previous picture where I had this really simple setup, let's start here on the left on a string system, a DC string. So what you have is one inverter for all your panels, and that's great because it's cheaper, it's a simple setup, and it's perfectly fine if there's no shade on any panels. But the problem is that for every group of panels, which is called an array, if a single panel is in shade, generally speaking, it means that the panels in that array or in that group, they are going to be bottlenecked by the performance of that one panel. And so if you have some trees that shade a panel, if you have a particularly weird corner of your roof that's higher or a chimney or something that's kind of shading a few panels, that will affect the performance, generally speaking, on the whole array, on the whole group of panels. So you really don't want this unless you have a really nice large flat roof with no shade. But if you have a nice large flat roof with no shade, a DC string, a string system will be the most cost-effective way to generate solar. In the middle here, you can have a string with what's called optimizers. So optimizers are this little thing that you put underneath each panel. And each panel still has, they're still connected to the single inverter, but this little device is, what it does is it reduces the effect of shade because it means that a panel is no longer the bottleneck for the whole group of panels or the whole array because of just shade on a single panel. So the optimizers help compensate for shade by eliminating the bottlenecks for individual panels that are shaded. So it's a little bit higher cost, maybe 10-20% if you get your whole system as optimizers. It is possible to get optimizers on particularly problematic parts of your system, but not the whole system. But generally speaking, optimizers are a good option if your roof is pretty simple still and you have some shade issues. And finally, on the right, you have a microinverter setup. So rather than having a single inverter on the side of your house, you have a tiny, tiny inverter underneath every single panel. That's why it's called a microinverter. And the advantage of this is that every panel is truly independent. It performs completely independent of every single other panel. And so it doesn't really matter if one panel is shaded. It literally has zero effect on all the other panels. Whereas for a DC optimized system, it will still have a little bit of an effect. And so microinverters are best in a few particular situations. Number one is when you have really, really heavy shading and you're trying to squeeze out every single ounce of performance from your panels. And number two is if you have a really complex roof shape, where you have lots of tiny little faces, one face, one roof face, one section of a roof face is here, one section of a roof face is there. And so you have all these isolated little groups of panels who are getting different amounts of sunlight constantly. And so you really want a maximum level of independence in that scenario. So you go for a microinverter. Microinverters also have a couple of other benefits in that they have a longer warranty, and if one panel goes down, or it won't affect any of the other panels at all. I'm not talking about shade, I'm talking about if there's an actual fault. So generally speaking, these are the three options. The most affordable is a string. If you have some shading issues, but your roof is reasonably simple, you go with a string with optimizers, generally speaking. And if you have really heavy shading or really complex roof, or you're just a super passionate about all the coolest technology and you're a total nerd, then you go for a microinverters. But the problem with microinverters is they cost about 40% more than the DC strings, roughly speaking. So if you can get away with not using them, it's generally more cost effective to do so. But there are many reasons to use them outside of just payback alone. Awesome. Give you a chance to digest all of that while we move on to the next slide, which is how does solar save you money? As we talked about earlier, you buy less energy from your grid. That is where you get most of your savings, 30 to 40 cents per kilowatt hour that you no longer need to pay. And number two is you can sell your excess energy back to the grid. And feed-in tariffs are commonly 4 cents a kilowatt hour, so much less, and it's probably going to keep going down. So I wouldn't really rely on that. Ultimately, you're trying to consume your own energy. That's how you save money. So here's some really rough examples. Obviously, these are huge generalizations because every house is different and every household uses different amounts of electricity, etc. But you could get a 7 kilowatt solar system for $6,000. You might save over $1,100 a year on reduced electricity bills. You might get some feed-in tariff back, and your payback period might be, say, 4.5 years. If you have a battery on top of that, it'll be a lot more expensive, but also you'll save a lot more because you're no longer buying electricity at the evening when solar is no longer producing energy. You're no longer buying energy in the middle of the night when your refrigerator is running in the middle of the night. And so the payback period is pretty similar because battery prices have come down quite recently this year with the new federal rebate. And so I'm just giving you guys a few examples, and the cost range is honestly really, really large because there's so many variables when it comes to a system, which we'll cover more of in this presentation. One of the first key variables is the type of system, DC string, optimized, microinverter, that has a huge effect on the price. That's one variable. Another variable is system size. So why don't we talk about that next? You want to choose the right system size because you want to make sure you have enough energy that you're generating, but you don't want to get a system that's too large for what you want because you're just paying more and you get diminishing returns. So how do you choose the right system size? Really, your system size comes from your energy use. The more energy you use, the larger the system needs to be because you need to generate more. So a solar system size is measured in kilowatts. And typically in New South Wales, a 1 kilowatt solar system produces 4 kilowatt hours of electricity every day. So what does that mean? It just means that the larger your solar system, the more electricity it generates, and that's a kind of a rough ratio that you can use. So for example, if you have a 10 kilowatt solar system, it might generate 40 kilowatt hours a day. So if your current electricity bill, your current electricity consumption is about 40 kilowatt hours a day, maybe you're in the vicinity of a 10 kilowatt system with a lot of other variations, but that's a really rough ballpark to get you started. So it's also really important to consider how your energy use is going to change in the future, because if you're going to get an EV, that's going to increase your electricity usage in the future. If you have a lot of gas appliances and you're hoping to get off gas and power everything with your own electricity, that's going to increase your energy usage. So you want to consider not just your current electricity usage, but your future electricity usage as well. And furthermore, if you're planning to add a battery, you just want to be more conscious of not being on the smaller size of solar, because you want to make sure that you have enough energy from your solar system to charge your battery as well. So we'll talk a bit more about batteries in a little bit. But here's a few specific examples. So let's say you have a small townhouse. You have a limited roof space. You have pretty modest energy use with lights, appliances, aircon, a few things, laptops, yada yada. No EVs, and you're not really you're not really using that much electricity each day, maybe 11 kilowatt hours a day. So how much do you need? Well, you would have remembered earlier that I said that a 1 kilowatt system generates roughly 4 kilowatt hours a day. So you might wonder, well, can I just divide 11 by 4 and I'll get something, I'll get, say, just under 3 kilowatts solar. Like that's fair. That's like a ballpark, that's a good starting point. But there's also other things that we need to consider. The first one is that even though you might generate 4 kilowatt hours per kilowatt throughout the year on average, in summer you're going to generate a lot more, in winter you're going to generate a lot less. So if your system is kind of right on that threshold, you're almost certainly not going to have enough for winter. Secondly, this average system size for solar has been steadily increasing over the last few years, and then most installers won't really touch anything less than 5 kilowatts these days. Some installers don't touch anything less than 6.6 kilowatts. And so you want a system that's actually that installers are willing to install. And then thirdly, once you're on the roof, the cost difference between a 3 kilowatt system and a 5 kilowatt system isn't that much, and you have a lot of fixed costs in even getting the installation started. So once you're on the roof, adding a few more panels is not that much of a deal, especially when your system is already that small, because the fixed cost component is going to be is going to be quite a large proportion of your total cost when your system is that small. So that's why we say 5 kilowatts probably the smallest system you can realistically expect. And that might be a pretty good ballpark size for a household using 11 kilowatt hours per day. Obviously, there are this is a simple example, and we can go into a lot more things that affect this as well. But that's just the starting point. So another example, let's look at a large family home. You might have a large roof, you have high usage, you have aircon, pool pump, family of 5, electric hot water, whole bunch of, stuff on the go. You might have EV charging. You might be using 40 kilowatt hours a day, which is much higher. So yeah, maybe maybe you need a system that's 13 kilowatts. So that'll cover you for most of the year. You might be a little bit undersized in the winter, but maybe you're okay with that because you just want the best payback period. And this is where the the artistic component of solar sizing comes in, because there's not often not one definite size that's best for a home if you have ample roof size. Because if you get a system that's slightly smaller, if you have heavy usage, then you're going to use a higher proportion of the energy you generate. That helps you, pay it back faster because you're using more of what you have bought. But if you have a system that's much larger, then it'll be much more expensive, but you get diminishing returns because you're not using all the energy you're producing all the time. Maybe you're only using it in winter. So there's really a bit of a spectrum between best payback versus most energy independent that every household needs to navigate themselves. What do you really value, right? Do you want to not give the energy companies a cent? Do you want to produce as much as you can? You don't really care if you're generating way more than you need in summer and in some other seasons, then sure, go on the larger size. Or maybe you think that what's most important to you is getting really good payback period and trying to find that sweet spot where you have a system that's easy, that makes sense for your roof, and you're happy to still need to pay some bills in some certain seasons, but you know that what you do install is going to pay itself off quicker. So then you may be on the lower end of the spectrum for how big your solar system size is. Cool. So planning for future usage. So we touched on this a little bit earlier, but buying an EV, replacing gas, having a larger family, adding a battery, a lot of these things can affect your future usage. So you don't want to just look at how much you're using, you want to look at how much you're using in the future. So let's take a look at this townhouse example. And this townhouse, say, wants to get an EV, adding 7 to 10 kilowatt hours a day, wants to switch from gas to electric. That's another 3 to 5 kilowatts a day. Sorry, I should say kilowatt hours a day. This home might need an extra 10 to 15 kilowatt hours extra per day. And that translates to a system, maybe you had decided on a 6 kilowatt system before, maybe there needs to be a 9 or 11 kilowatt system in the future. And so in this particular example, you might think that, okay, do I need a larger system because I want a battery? But maybe not necessarily in this case, because if you think about what this family's trying to do, they want to add a hot water heat pump, but you can set a timer on that in the middle of the day. So you don't really expect to be charging that from the battery. And they're planning to get an EV, but actually they expect that they're actually home a lot of the time because they drive at night or whatever reason. So the EV charging is EV is mostly being charged during the day. So really you might be adding more loads, but all those loads are being added during the daytime. So your battery is not actually adding a battery is not actually something you would need to consider for these loads specifically if your usage is mainly in the daytime already. But here's another example. So let's say you're switching from gas to a electric. So your reverse cycle air conditioner for heating can add 5 to 15 kilowatt hours a day. So that should say 15 kilowatt hours. And so if you had a 6 or 7 kilowatt system, that might need to be a 7 to 10 kilowatt system in the future. And you probably need a battery to enable it you would probably want a battery to support that reverse cycle air conditioner if you don't want to be paying for grid electricity at night because you want that to be charged from the battery, powered by the battery instead. So those are just a few examples of what you can think of. We'll get some of those numbers in the slides fixed up shortly. But let's go into some special circumstances. So those are some examples of some typical configurations. But what happens if you have something a little bit trickier for your home? Number one could be shade. So here are some examples of this is an example of a roof that might get some partial shade at different times of the day. And so generally speaking, where you want to place panels is as high as you can, north if you can, east and west are also good. And you want to place them in a way that they aren't affected by shade. But if you do get shade and you can't avoid shade, that's okay. We just need to get the right type of system as mentioned earlier with optimizers or microinverters. So where you particularly need a microinverter is if your roof is quite complex. So we'll talk about that on the next slide. But if you have any form of shade, it's best to have optimizers. So in the pictures, you can see everyone knows tree shade, but another thing that often not considered is just shade from your own roof. So for example, in this roof here on the left-hand section, you can see that your roof itself casts a shadow onto the lower section of the roof. And let's say that this household really wants to fill their roof with solar and they want panels everywhere. Well, you definitely want to consider how you're going to compensate for that shade, that morning shade, and that lower roof. So if you have a complex roof, what does this mean? It means a few things. One, if it's very steep, installs will often charge you extra because it's harder to work there. There's more safety considerations, but it's still doable. And if your roof has a very steep pitch, you probably don't want to put panels on the south side because they're going to perform even worse. Two, if your roof is really small, This often coincides with your roof having really complex shape, which is, lots of small little faces. And so in this situation, a microinverter is much more suitable because you have more flexibility with your panel placement there. And so it's really important to actually get an installer who's willing to do a site inspection and do a custom design, because a lot of these volume solar installers, they might look at a really hard roof and they say, oh, that's not worth my time. I'm just going to say it's not worth it. In some cases, they might be right. But in some other cases, it's actually really feasible and can still make financial sense. You just needed someone to actually take a closer look at it. Right, let's move on to batteries. So what we want to talk about here, starting with battery basics. Batteries have two purposes. Number one is they store solar for nighttime use. And number two is they provide backup in blackouts. It needs to be considered for configured for this, so it's not automatic. So you just need to check with your installer that they'll actually do this. And your backup function might not back up the whole house. It might back up, the fridge and your Wi-Fi and a couple of lights, and that's, maybe that's all you need in the blackout. Or you can have a super large battery, maybe you'll back up, more circuits on your home. But those are kind of the main two reasons. You save energy, but you also have the additional blackout protection as well. So one question that's asked a lot is, should you install battery with solar panels or later? So what this really depends on is how confident you are that you actually want a battery. Because installing a battery at the same time as solar can be more cost effective for a couple of reasons. Number one, the installer's already there. They've already got the job. They might give you, a more favorable pricing. Number two is that um, if you install solar and battery together, you can get what's called a hybrid inverter. And this is an inverter that not just takes the energy from your solar and converts it into a form that's usable for your home, but also it's something that it's an inverter that your battery can also plug into. So the battery doesn't need its own inverter elsewhere, and you're kind of saving on the component cost there. So that's why getting them together is probably going to be cheaper. But um, the key question is, how confident are you that you want them together? Because if you're getting a really large solar system, you have really high usage, you can definitely get them both together. But maybe you have, maybe your roof isn't that favorable, and then you have a smaller system in comparison to your usage, and maybe you have some shading issues, and you're not actually sure how much excess energy you have left over for a battery. You might realize that you don't have much left over at all. It's not worth it. So in that case, it's totally okay to install solar first and then add a battery on later. That's totally feasible. It'll just be slightly more expensive, but not hugely, hugely so. If you are going to install a battery later, you should, and you're very sure about this, that you're definitely going to install a battery within 12 months. Maybe you're saving for it. Maybe you're just budgeting for cash flow. Maybe you're waiting for, a particular battery model to be available again. You could get a hybrid inverter, like I mentioned, because then it'll be easier for them to come back and just plug it into the hybrid inverter, and you're saving on the need for a separate, inverter for your battery as well. But the reason I say that you should only get a hybrid inverter if you're definitely going to get a battery within 12 months is that battery technology changes, inverter technology changes. You might get a hybrid inverter that's compatible with a particular battery, but a year or two later, you have another generation of batteries come out that isn't compatible with our hybrid inverter. So that's why it's usually better to do them closer together. So another thing to consider with batteries is VPPs. So what is a VPP? A VPP is when you have lots of different batteries connected together via software, and they work together like one great big power station to provide energy when the grid needs it. So you get paid for energy your battery provides to the grid during peak demand, but the VPP can take energy from your battery when it's needed. So let's just unpack that. Like, why is this a thing? Why do VPPs even exist? It's because if you remember our chart from way back at the start, we saw that solar produces much more energy at the middle of the day, and then it produces much less energy at 6 p.m. Approximately when the sun goes down. That's a problem because it means that there's too much energy in the grid during the middle of the day and not nearly enough energy around peak time at 6 p.m. when everyone comes home and starts cooking dinner, etc. And so what the VPP is trying to do is it's trying to shift some of that load. So it could say that, hey, there's too much energy in the system during the middle of the day. I want to charge the battery. And hey, there's not enough energy in peak time in the evening. I want to discharge the battery into the grid. And this is beneficial for the grid because it helps grid stability. It helps keep the lights on for everyone. Makes the grid more resilient. It makes, reduces the amount of fluctuations and instability in the electricity power supply. So VPP is actually really beneficial from a community perspective because you're helping everyone keep the grid more stable. The reason you get paid is because for VPP is because even though you buy electricity from your electricity retailer, your electricity retailer buys electricity from the wholesale market. You can think of like as a stock market for energy. Energy costs different amounts at different times of the day. And then if you have a huge demand for electricity at 6 p.m., your electricity retailer is paying a lot and they're paying more than they are charging you probably. So an electricity retailer like AGL or Origin, they'll have their VPPs because they want to be able to control batteries so that they can discharge energy into the grid when it is most needed so that they are not paying for so much expensive electricity for you. And this is why if you get a VPP, with your energy retailer, they'll give you a small benefit because they say, hey, in exchange for letting us control your battery, we'll pay you some rent. And we'll give you, $150 a year or whatever to discharge. So the pricing structures for VPPs are actually really complicated and not very transparent. So if you're interested, definitely would encourage you to do a bit more reading. The other notable shout out here is a retailer called Amber. And what they do is because Amber as a retailer, what they do is they just give you access to the wholesale price directly. And they're effectively providing a tool. They give you access to wholesale prices. And so you rather than the retailer kind of trading energy and using the battery to buy low, sell high, you're doing that yourself with your battery. You're just exposed to the wholesale market, which means you can make a lot of money by charging your battery in the middle of the day with your almost free solar energy and then selling it in the evening when electricity is more expensive. You can make a lot more money doing that than another VPP, but you're also exposed to a lot more risk. So that's maybe for more for households who are comfortable with that. Awesome. Let's move on to getting a solar quote. And let me just turn my light on really quickly because it's getting dark. So what do you need to think about when getting a quote for solar? First of all, there are two main incentives. The first one is the SRES scheme is the official name. It's basically many people know them as just STCs. They are technology certificates, and what it means is when you get solar, you 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 have access to these tradable certificates that you can sell for money. But practically speaking, when you get if you get solar, what usually happens is you assign the right to those certificates to your installer, who then sells those certificates on your behalf. So really what I'm trying to say is you don't really need to worry about it because your installer has already assumed that you're going to get this rebate. They've already factored it into your quote. They're going to process the rebate themselves, and you're just going to get a discount. So I wouldn't actually worry about the amount of this rebate itself because it's going to come through into the amount that you're quoted for anyway, and you're not going to really need to be, involved in the process and any of that. The second part of that is that also applies to batteries. So that was a addition that happened around the middle of this year, which has dropped the price of batteries significantly by maybe about 35%, which is suddenly why batteries are becoming economical from a payback perspective. The second government incentive is the VPP incentive from the New South Wales government. And this you get this as an upfront payment if you join a VPP with your battery. So the larger your battery, the larger the VPP discount. And this is done. This isn't really something your installer would do. This is more the VPP provider would help you with this. Awesome. So let's get into a few more tips. So we talked about how the solar size is really important. One way you can work out the solar size, the system size that you might need is to use Sunspot. It's a free tool. It can help you work out the system size. There's some automated panel placements and some payback period calculations, etc. And would you make a $10,000 decision based on something automatically generated from Sunspot? Probably not, but it gives you a really good starting point for a conversation with an installer. You can look at your roof for the first time in high resolution. You can understand some of the assumptions that you can understand the ballpark that Sunspot's going to give you, and that helps you have a conversation with the installer because you can compare the difference and you can say, hey, why can't Sunspot's giving me an estimate of this much. Why have you given me an estimate of this much? And it just starts a conversation with the installer because you can see if they can actually explain their reasoning well, or whether they just brush aside your questions. Next good tip is to find a good solar retail. So you cannot beat a word of mouth recommendation, preferably from someone who's had a really good experience. And this is not only because the installer is good, but it also means that the installer knows that you're more likely to be serious and they're probably more likely to give you time compared to someone that's reached out cold. Secondly, it's always a good sign when a retailer is a new energy tech approved seller. It's a voluntary industry code of conduct. It just means they've agreed to a certain set of standards for how they conduct their business. Check online reviews, obviously, check the good and the bad, but especially check the bad reviews, check the one-star ratings, and especially check for the companies who seem to not do anything after the installation is done. So see if there's any mentions of, oh, the solar system wasn't working and they just didn't return my calls and didn't come out to fix it, that sort of stuff. A good company will always fix their mistakes or make sure you get something that's installed properly and works over the years. Next tip is to check how long they've been in business. What you don't want is a company that shuts down every year and spins up a new company and leaves all their old customers hanging in the dust and just doesn't honor their warranty. If a company's been around for a couple of years, 3, 4, 5, 6+ years, that's much safer than a company that's only just started. And get a couple of quotes. So 2 to 3 quotes, depending on your level of confidence. But it's not just the quantity of quote that matters. We talked to some people who have gotten 6, 7, 8 quotes, and that's kind of a waste of everyone's time. What you really want is 2 to 3 quality quotes, right? Even 1 quote is fine if you have enough confidence. But if you're not too familiar with the market and you want to get a sense for things, get 2 to 3 quality quotes. What do I mean by quality? It means that you have confidence that they've actually looked at your roof properly, that the proposal has been personalized to your situation, and that they've actually considered your roof. You can do an online proposal for solar really, really quickly these days. You can do it remotely, but it doesn't mean they've actually paid a lot of attention to your roof, the feasibility of adding panels, have to look at your switchboard, have to consider where the wiring will go, have they considered what you'll do with your electric hot water if you get solar. Will they put you on a smart timer or something? So there really is a difference between companies that spend 10 minutes giving you a really quick quote versus a company that will come out for, say, half an hour, and really kind of walk through your house. And so it doesn't, you don't necessarily need, a super in-depth quote straight from the get-go, because installers also need to figure out who to spend their time with. But you want to make sure that when you do get your quotes, you get to a point where you're confident in them and that they have been prepared diligently. Final tip is to find some for installers is to check that the installers are Solar Accreditation Australia SAA accredited. So this accreditation is on the individual, not on the company. So you need to be accredited as an installer or as a designer. So most companies will have a couple of people who are accredited, and just make sure they've actually got that accreditation. in terms of the products, you want to it's usually safer to go with products that have a long track record in Australia, because Australia has actually some pretty harsh conditions with the sun. And in coastal areas, you will have corrosion issues to worry about. So a good starting point is, has this brand been around in Australia for a while? Have they had a track record in Australia? Do the ratings and reviews generally seem okay? All the basic stuff you would expect. And you want to check battery warranties. Or if you want to check warranties, what's standard for solar panels is 25, 30 years. Inverters are generally 10 years plus. Microinverters are about 25 years, if I recall correctly. And battery warranties are usually around 10 years. So that's kind of just standard. And you just want to make sure that you want to check if anything looks abnormal, if something that's much shorter than that. Finally, if you're a Northern Beaches Council resident and you're in this LGA, feel free to book a consultation with the Solar and Energy Advisory Service, and we're happy to review your quotes and provide you an opinion on those. And there'll be a link to book later in these slides. Finally, what else to look for in the solar and battery quotes? A lot of things here. We don't need to cover them in too much detail, but you want to actually know what products you're getting. You want to, at the minimum, know the brand of the panel and the inverter and the batteries, and so you can actually look those things up. Itemized breakdown of costs. You're not really going to get every single nut and bolt on a line item, but you want to get a sense for what all the standard things are and what the non-standard things are. So you would expect solar panels, inverter, battery, separately listed. Sometimes you might need switchboard upgrades to support your solar, so you want that separate and you want to know how that affects the cost. If you have, if you need a particularly tricky wiring upgrade, you might want those listed separately. But basically what it allows you to do is allows you to compare apples for apples. You want to know, if you're comparing between two different quotes, you want to know how the core products themselves compare, and you want to know how any complications compare, like switchboard upgrades, so you can compare like for like. Payment options, 10% deposit is standard. Most installers will also offer financing options. If financing is the only way you can afford solar, that's actually still not a bad idea, because your savings may exceed it. This is not financial advice. But financing will always increase the total cost of your system. So, if you have the cash lying around, then you generally wouldn't go for it. And in the calculations part, this one's really interesting, because you can see what assumptions they use to estimate your savings. Most installers will be not too outrageous here, but you just want to check things like, oh, what do they assume my electricity tariff is? How much energy do they assume I'm using each day? How much do they assume I'm using during the day when I'm home? So, for example, if you told them that you're never home during the day, you don't want to see on your bill, your quote, an assumption that you're using 60% of your electricity during the day, because that's just not stacking up. Warranties. So workmanship warranty, which is separate from product warranty, you want to make sure that's maybe really good, is 10 years plus, minimum 5 years, really, for workmanship warranty. Accreditation and insurances, you just want to, if you want to really kind of dive into things, you can ask to see proof of their insurance, proof of their licenses, that sort of thing. You can check them yourself on the relevant database for the agency. But most installers, they'll provide a lot of this information automatically in their proposal. So let's summarize. In summary, 5 steps for rooftop solar. Step 1, do some background reading. Plenty of good content on the Northern Beaches Council website. Step 2, you want to understand your last 12 months of energy usage by looking at your bills. You don't actually need to look at multiple bills, because maybe 2/3 of the way through your bill, there'll be a nice little chart that shows you energy usage through the year. And on this chart, you'll be able to see how your energy changes between summer and winter. Number 3, you can check solar suitability and payback using the Sunspot tool just to get a really initial idea so you're a bit more equipped to have some of these conversations with the installer. Number 4, you can start getting quotes from solar retailers, solar companies, ask around your friends, try to find someone who has good experience, someone who, get a company that seems to value your relationship, the relationship they have with their customers. And step 5, have a review of the quotes, check you're happy with the T's and C's, and proceed with installation. So there's usually a bit of a lead time for solar. 4 to 6 weeks is not uncommon. It gets really busy during this time of the year, so you're almost certainly looking at an installation next year, even if you get started today. That's okay. And the installation itself will usually take 1 to 3 days, usually faster if there's no rain or interruptions or anything like that. And of course, if you need any help, if you have any questions, if you want us to kind of talk through your situation together, or if you want us to look at some of your quotes together, you're more than welcome to book a free consultations with the Energy and Solar Advisory Service. So feel free to scan the QR code there, and you'll be able to book some time with a member of the team. Cool. And I'll leave it there. The next slide is the Q&A, so I'll hand it back to you, Ali. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Mute. Thank you, Jimmy. That was a very informative and very detailed webinar, and I'm sure all of you are frantically been writing away, but don't worry, this has been recorded and you will get this recording to your emails and post on the website. So yes, we do have a number of other information sessions coming up, as you can see there. And we have also a number of drop-in sessions which are not on there, but the link that I've sent in the chat, you can look at the next roadshow that we have coming up, which is, I will tell you, I'll find that out in a second for you and put it in this chat actually for everyone to look at. What I really want to do is, I'm sure there's some really great questions out there, but I haven't actually had many come through yet. So is there anything that anyone wants to know about? You can put it in the chat. Do we know when the SRES grants will finish, Jimmy?
Yes, so they finish in 2030. So every year, the value of the rebate goes down slightly until it goes down to 0 in 2030.
Yeah. So yes, so it's the start of the calendar year as well, isn't it? So it's January.
That's right.
Not
yeah.
financial year.
Calendar year, that's right. So it's the rebates are if you compare no rebates with rebates, it's quite a bit. But if you compare the difference each year, it's still a reasonable amount. It'll be a couple $100 at least, right? But it's not the end of the road if you miss it. And because solar technology is actually improving each year, you get the panels become a little bit more efficient each year. So it kind of, if you wait, the panels get a little bit better, but the rebates get a little bit less. So they sort of cancel each other out a little bit. But at the end of the day, rather than trying to time the optimum price, the better way to look at it is how much savings you're missing out on by not getting solar. So that's probably a larger factor.
So, great, thank you. We've actually got a really good one here. It's around the door-to-door operators, salesmen, so who are coming around and pressing for finance packages on the spot. I mean, I can answer this, but you can probably answer this too. It's illegal. It shouldn't be happening. New South Wales government have banned it. So if it is happening, that's why we provide this service, an impartial service, without being partnered with any company or product to give you the advice. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Jimmy.
Yes, I'll add. The reason this happens is because we're in a really interesting situation where solar is actually so good that it almost seems too good to be true, and and so it's actually hard to distinguish, fact from fiction. Um, it is true that in many cases, if you get financing, it can still be a good economic deal because your savings still exceed the cost of the financing. That is true. There has been research showing this. But how you make that decision should not be through a door-to-door salesperson who's just kind of thrusting this topic upon you. So, um, Rewiring Australia have their group. They've done a lot of research. Encourage you to look up what they've done. They've kind of proven, well, they've done research showing that finance solar makes a lot of sense. And so if you're in that position, don't discount it. There are also a lot of green loan options out there. There are also banks that will reduce your mortgage rate if you have solar or other energy efficient appliances. And and so what I'm trying to say is green loans are a thing, they're legitimate, but don't, you know, uh, don't go for the first one that comes to your door. Do some research yourself.
Yeah, so just to add, the green loans is one part, but they shouldn't be coming and doing unsolicited sales at your door in New South Wales. Anyway, that's not accepted. What's this one? I have a steep roof. I'm hoping to avoid the cost of scaffolding. Some installers say that they will go on the roof without scaffolding, and some say they won't. What questions should I be asking to ensure it will be a good fit out? And is there a way of finding an installer who is good with steeper roofs?
Great question. So steep roof is a really good example of a complex situation. Um, and in a complex situation, you want to almost gauge how long the installer is actually on site trying to assist the situation. For example, if you have someone who's on the phone with you and they've given you a proposal virtually and you tell them the steep roof, you're trying to tell them it's steep, they're like, yeah, yeah, no problem, we deal with steep roofs all the time, but they never actually come take a look. They don't actually know how steep it is. They haven't really thought about how installation is going to go. You probably don't want to put too much weight in their opinion. Compared to if you had a really good local installer come out, they spent, I don't know, a long time, an hour on site, really trying to understand how it actually be done, you'd obviously trust them more. So what are you trying to looking for? You want to look for an installer who is trying to figure out how to do it, as opposed to a company that's trying to figure out how to sell it to you. So you don't want to, in this situation, because it's probably limited by technical feasibility, it's a good sign, a green flag is if an installer's coming out and they're thinking about, okay, I need to get my boys there, I need a scissor lift over there, or I need harnesses over there, I'd probably come down this way. They're actually thinking through how they would do it. Because what you don't want is a disconnect between who's trying to sell you the solar versus who's installing the solar. Because there are cases where an installation team rocks up on the day and they take a look at your roof and they say, oh no, sorry, I can't do it. Because they've never actually assessed it properly because someone else has kind of done the assessment for them. So that's probably a big risk, which is just haven't actually looked at your roof properly. Um, in terms of what questions to ask them, I mean, it's for the most part, it's almost not necessarily your responsibility. It's almost it's their responsibility to make sure it's safe, it's compliant, that it's feasible. But it's your responsibility to make sure you believe them. So uh, you want to you yeah, I guess the basic question is, can you do it? Like, is this a hard install? Why? What are you going to do? And you just want to make sure they can actually, you just be curious about how it's going to be done and just see if the answers they're giving you make sense or if they're just trying to brush you off.
Yeah, good one. Thank you, Jimmy. I'm not entirely sure. I was just responding to this other one around from administrator. I don't know if you could expand the question a bit more, but they've said VPP Red Hill. Do you know of any interest by residents? I don't.
Um,
Are you? I'm not sure if they're trying to say, have we come across them and do we know whether anyone's taken up on on Red Hill as a VPP? I don't know.
I'm not sure. I'm not aware of that specifically.
No.
But maybe I can expand on VPP offerings in general. Like my opinion
Yeah.
is that the offerings are still quite immature for the most part at this stage. The reason is a lot of these VPP offerings are designed by energy retailers who are trying to save on their own costs, and they haven't quite figured out how to make the VPP offering clear and easily understandable to the consumer, how to have like a incentive structure that's really unambiguous and reliable. So there's often a lot of weird conditions in these sort of programs. The other provider I mentioned, Amber, they're different because they don't, they're more a tool than a retailer. They don't actually make money from selling you energy. They just make money from a monthly subscription fee. And so their offering is, I guess, fundamentally clearer because they're just saying, oh, we'll give you the tools to trade your own energy and it counts as a VPP. So, yeah, join up with us and get the incentive and trade at your own risk. And so it's a bit of a kind of different model to these retailer models.
Okay. Well, we don't have any more questions in the chat. And I think, oh, no, as I said that, there is one more here. Is there a comparison doc or site for recommended brands of panels and batteries which are available locally? I guess you mean onshore, as in within Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, there are a few well-known sites. I mean, if you there's some sites that you can very easily find. More well-known ones in Australia would be Solar Quotes or Solar Choice. They have a ton of articles. They have lots of reviews on all of these sorts of things. So that's always a good sense check for whether the brands themselves are good. So maybe give those guys a Google.
Yeah. And I mean, do a Google search is a good one and look at sort of some of the reviews that's there. We've already mentioned around the looking that they're covered by the CC, and also that just ask your neighbours. Like when you use the sunspot tool, you can see everyone that's close to you that's actually had solar installed as well. I always find that's a really good one to just good excuse to go and knock on the neighbour's door and ask what system they've got and are they happy with it. If that's it for the end of this webinar, I appreciate it's getting late into the evening, and we just wanted to, again, thanks Jimmy for our wonderful presentation tonight. We do ask, please, if you can, just take another couple of minutes just to do this feedback survey for us now. It really helps us improve our services to you and understand what it is that you need to understand more on our subject. And I wish you the very best of luck with your solar journey. The link I sent you also, it's gone. Where did it go? There it is. The link that I sent you in the chat also takes you to the roadshows that are happening where they're face-to-face in our libraries. But you'll get that link in the email as well, along with the recording. So I'm just going to leave this slide up just for a couple more minutes for you to take the time to just quickly give the survey. But thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Thank you very much.
Right. Do you reckon that's enough time, Jimmy? I think so. Everyone to scan the QR code?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, I'm going to press stop on the recording.